you for joining us. So this is the first in what we're hoping is going to be a series of events looking at careers for early career professionals. So it's being led by our young members group. One of the co-chairs, Michelle, is here in person, and the other co-chair is Warren. So also, if anyone wants to get involved with our younger members group, they're always happy to hear from you. So you can always contact them at ymg@frin.org.uk, I think is right, isn't it? Lovely. So yes, the whole purpose of this series is going to be to share the knowledge from our experts in the Royal Institute of Navigation community with the up and coming, sort of the next generation of experts, really. So we have 3 great speakers lined up today. I'm not going to give our speakers a big introduction because I don't want to spoil the actual stories. If I give a bio, that's sort of giving away the farm, I think, as it were. So up first is Dr. Ramsey Faragher, the founder, president, and CTO of FocalPoint Positioning. He's a fellow of the Royal Institute of Navigation and a fellow of Queen's College at the University of Cambridge. And today's a special day for Ramsey as well, that he's receiving the Gold Award from us at the AGM today. So I will hand over to Ramsey.
Thank you. So hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be talking at this present today, and hopefully it can be useful in letting you all know a bit about how I've managed to get to, as Claire says, picking up a gold medal today. So I've been doing some things well along the way. My career has been very much on the technology side of navigation, so building the technologies to help people go and do the navigation. And I've been very lucky in my career to have worked on a huge range of platforms. So I've actually worked on all of those things pictured right there, things that go all the way to the bottom of the ocean, and things that eventually will go all the way to Mars. That's the ExoMars Martian rover, which is not yet launched, even though I worked on its navigation system 15 years ago. But that's not my fault. So hopefully we'll get there eventually. And I work now on trying to make smartphone and smartwatch and autonomous vehicle navigation better for consumers. I'll explain a little bit more about all of that along the way. My career path was not very carefully planned out, which is probably one of the first important things to point out. So I did an undergrad in physics at Cambridge, and at that stage and that age, I had modest ambitions. I was planning on winning a Nobel Prize for something, just figuring out what it was going to be. And I thought I was going to go and do a PhD in astrophysics, and I wanted to discover some extra solar planets. But I went to an open day in the astrophysics group at Cambridge to see what the PhDs were going to be on offer. And there was one guy stood in the corner of the room with a map with a wiggly line on it. And I went over to find out what that was all about. And this was a guy that was wanting to apply techniques used in astrophysics to position mobile phones in order to save lives and make people much safer. And this was way back in 2003, and there was no such thing as a GPS chip in a smartphone. And so he was doing it all with mobile phone signals themselves. And I thought, actually, maybe I should try and do something that's a bit more applicable to humans on Earth rather than random rocks circling the stars far away. Most importantly, I found Peter Smith to be a really engaging and fun guy, and thought he will be a fantastic PhD supervisor. And he has been, and he's been the chairman of my company now, and I still write patents with him to this day, and we're good, strong friends. And so I think one of the most important things I'll note at this point in what I'm saying is very important to both work for really nice, clever people, and to yourself be a really nice person as well. Because it's much easier to come and get people to work for you if you're nice. So I ended up doing that PhD in radio positioning and sort of bit the bug and shifted my career path onto navigation positioning. And as I was rounding that out, I assumed I was going to go on to do a postdoc and stay in academia and be a professor and build a career purely in academia around all of that stuff. But by this point, I'd been in Cambridge for 7 years, and I was worried that I was going to wake up one day hating the place, having not gone and experienced the stuff, because it's a very small bubble, and I thought I should go and sort of get more experience of what the rest of the world is like. And I went for an interview at BAE Systems and got into the Advanced Technology Centre there. And that was what I would call my golden age, really, of working in this field, because I would have not been able to work on anything like this wide range of technologies anywhere else. And that's another tip I would say: if you get the opportunity to work somewhere where there's a huge range of things you can get involved in, which is hugely diverse, you learn an awful lot very quickly. And that then allows you to become very quickly highly knowledgeable in lots of different areas. So I'm still the only person I've met in our fields who worked on a nuclear submarine and a Martian rover at exactly the same time. And there's transferable skills between those two, because GPS isn't available to either. And in those years, I had the quite simple ambition of being the director of the Advanced Technology Centre and sort of leading that group. Then it turned out I sort of got wind early that they were going to be closing the Advanced Technology Centre in a few years' time. And so that was then a course correction that was not entirely of my control, but I got back in touch with Peter, my PhD supervisor, and talked about going back to Cambridge for a postdoc. And actually went back into a different group. I went back into the computer science department, because Peter retired, and people in the computer science department were also working on stuff to do with position navigation. So I got my feet under that table, and sure enough, that I was back on the path of going into academia and getting a permanent position and so on. And as I was working in academia, I met people from Google and CSR, who now become Qualcomm, and other companies who told me their problems. And it's funny that as an academic, often companies will come and admit their problems to you and ask you for help in a way that they don't tell the public immediately about. And I started to really get an understanding as to some of the limitations inside modern smartphones, but some of the huge improvements that could be made in them with some clever software. And so I had this real decision as to what I was going to do, whether I was going to stay in academia and write a load of papers on this cool stuff that I thought I could do, or whether I would be brave and start up my own company and do it that way and maybe make a bit of money along the way. And that was the direction I decided to go in. And with no background or experience in starting up a company, I started a company. And it's 8 years strong, and it's not doing too badly for itself. We've closed some big deals last year, so we've managed to do a good job. And as you can see on the sort of diagram, I did keep a foot in academia. So Cambridge is a bit strange. You've got the university with its lecturers and normal teaching, but there's 30 colleges, and the colleges supervise the students and help them to do their homework, basically, mark their homework. So I'm a fellow of Queen's, but don't have any academic position in the university, but it lets me keep my foot in that door and invite people to nice dinners at Cambridge, which helps with some of the business development program. So I'll round out just with some of my thoughts on things I would do again or not do again, or things I would advise myself to do if I went back in time. So the first thing is definitely to trust your gut. And if you feel like something's not going right, it probably isn't, and make that step to change the direction. I didn't realize this until only a couple of years ago, but I've always had this attitude of turning every failure into a success. And what I mean by that is, don't even consider a failure to be a failure. Just look at what you need to do next to turn the situation that has currently presented itself to you into the successful outcome, and just keep a cool head and keep going. I do think one of the most important stages of my career was working in an environment where I was working for a very big company that had access to lots and lots of really cool programs that were all going at once. And I found, accidentally for me, but for you, if you're in the same situation, go and try and seek this out. Find the spot within that big company, the research arm, whatever entity it is within a huge company that actually has a tap into all of the cool programs that are going on within that company, and then try and get involved with as many things as you can as early in your career as you can. And that gives you lots of opportunities to build on, and lots of options as to what you're going to do next. Build champions along the way. So if you're a difficult person, people will not fight your corner behind your back. And so be nice and be a good guy and a good girl, and people will help you even when you're asleep or in a different country or don't know that they're helping you. Lead by example and work very hard, and try to have a very good work-life balance regardless, because the family matters more than your work do. And I'll leave it there if there's any questions.
Excellent, thank you so much, Emily. So I know we have quite a small group, so I'll break this with my own question first. So one of the points that you had was looking at turning failure into success. Do you have any particular example where you've really turned the situation around?
Yeah, so mostly within FocalPoint, running a small company is always things that you can't foresee happening. And most small companies, most startups, have the story of the funding round collapse. And that happened for FocalPoint in our third funding round, so about 4 years ago. And I won't get into all of the broad details because I know this is being recorded and very long. But I had a term sheet, which is basically the agreements with venture capitalists that you put money into a company. And that term sheet disappeared for reasons I won't get into. And I managed to basically phone around my champions that were already invested in the company. And within a day, a particular great champion had organised what's called a convertible note, which is when investors agree to quickly put in some money to bridge the situation again. And it was just the attitude of, okay, term sheet's gone, it's fine, I'll sort this out. And the other option would have been to go home and cry. So you've just got to have the right kind of attitude to get through the bad stuff and be confident in the stuff that you can always do it.
Thanks. Does anyone else have?
I do.
Yep.
There's a question that I would like to ask all of you, so I'll save that one for the end. Because I think it'd be really interesting to see what different people's perspective is. But on your general tips, you've got find a great person as a boss. What would you do or advise someone who's in the situation where their boss isn't great? They're perhaps unresponsive to emails or communications, and they're just difficult to work with in general. What would you recommend to someone in that position?
Yeah, it's very hard. So it's very, very unlikely that you will ever change a person in their attitudes. And so I've had similar things in the past where I've then escalated, so gone higher up the chain, and that can work either way, right? That person up the chain then kicks the team, so in a situation where it became clear to me that that escalation hadn't worked and the team picked, I moved on into one of the other directions. And in fact, it was that step from academia to FocalPoint was made much easier by this sort of thing. Basically, someone in Cambridge was plagiarizing my work, and there was no help in the manner that there should have been to prevent that from happening. And FocalPoint was born. And I have no regrets about that. So that can be one of those really big decisions where you take a really big move. But just remember, you'll be leaving behind a shit boss and you'll be going off to a much better place.
Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions for Ramsey? No, lovely. We can come back at the end as well again. So our next speaker is Ivana-Maria Carrioni-Burnett. Ivana is a marine pilot at the Port of London Authority and a strong advocate for women in maritime and human rights at sea. She's also an associate fellow of the Royal Institute of Navigation and is the chair or chair-elect of our maritime navigation group.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here. So if we could bring up my Instagram. So I'm what you might call a practical navigator. Basically, I'm obsessed with the sea. You'll see, I think Claire's just bringing up my Instagram. You can see from a very young age, from as soon as I could stand and walk, I was on boats, and I've absolutely loved it. I've always been near the sea or connected with the sea, and it's it's just what inspires me the most and what I'm most passionate about. So what does that mean in terms of how I ended up going into navigation? Well, when I was 14, I was asked to choose my GCSEs, and that's when I planned my career. I have a lot of family who were ex-military, and although I didn't meet some of them because they passed away before I was born, or I was very young when they were alive, I've always had that military background in my family. So that sort of inspired me to think about options for potentially joining the military myself, and obviously the Royal Navy, going to sea, was the obvious choice. I went into the careers office and they showed me various options. I was quite good at the sciences. They were trying to get me to go into technology, but that wasn't so much what I was passionate about. And I saw this option for hydrographics and meteorology, surveying the ocean floor and forecasting the weather. And I was brought up on Star Trek, so exploring strange new worlds and going boldly into different environments was my thing. So that's what I chose to do, and I chose my A-levels for that very purpose. I went into maths, physics and geography. I excelled at geography more than the maths and physics. And then I looked at how to get into the Royal Navy, so it was natural for me to join the Combined Cadet Force, which was attached to my school, and my parents agreed to it, thinking I would go on all these courses and come back and never want to go again. Unfortunately for them, I absolutely loved it. There were opportunities to get on the water, to go sailing, and gain these leadership skills, which I found I really actually quite enjoyed. So I went down the officer route, which involves interviews with the Admiralty Interview Board. And I did that first when I was 16, and I'll echo what Ramsey said, I failed. But apparently I failed by one of the highest failures I'd ever seen, something like 2 marks. But what it meant is that I went away, and then everything I did in that following year supported my growth and development in leadership. You know, I was doing things like taking charge of my year group's song and dance competition, or I went on actual leadership courses with the Combined Cadet Force. And it wasn't until partway through this second interview that they said, did you do all that in just this last year? And I suddenly looked and went, oh, yes, I did. So that meant I passed second time round, much better prepared. And as soon as I finished my A-levels, I went and joined Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. It's essentially a little bit like a boys' boarding school with some girls. And so I had absolutely no problem settling in. I went through with a lot of engineers, so a lot of them were graduates, so they didn't maybe adjust so well to taking orders and coming out of the university lifestyle into such a strict environment. I was coming straight from school, you know, that was sort of slightly easier for myself. I always knew I wanted to go into hydrography. I didn't go into that straight away. I got a basis in warfare, which is the merchant navy equivalent of being a deck officer. And then I specialised into hydrographics and meteorology. Again, a failure. I didn't quite make the grade in my meteorological studies and exams, which suited me perfectly because I wanted to remain at sea and go to sea. And so I focused on hydrographics, which was wonderful. As you start going up the ranks, though, you start getting into a position where you're training the junior officers in navigation and in ship handling. And I actually really love that. My best captains were the ones that really coached and mentored me or saw potential in me. And I really, really valued giving that back and coaching and mentoring the other junior officers and sharing the knowledge that I picked up along the way. So I ended up almost coming out of hydrography and specialising in navigation and going into an instructor role. As part of my progress, I ended up completing my command qualification, which is equivalent to Merchant Navy Master's Certificate. And I didn't get an opportunity to serve as a captain or a master, but I had that ticket. And that ticket was also my ticket out of the Royal Navy. I could see that in the hydrographics world, survey ships were doing less and less hydrographics work. So many of my survey ships, we ended up doing fishery protection or mine countermeasures or migrant operations and not our core role. And actually, as an officer, I was always in more of a managerial role than, you know, doing the processing, doing the actual survey work. So I wasn't able to keep those skills up as much as I would have liked. I could also see that the hydrographics branch was changing within the Royal Navy, and that has significantly changed today. We're down to, I think, 1 or 2 survey ships left within the Royal Navy now. And I could also see that the people just ahead of me were struggling to get the jobs they want and progress as quickly as they wanted. So there was an opportunity for me to sidestep out of the Royal Navy, and my command ticket was that ticket out. I interviewed all around the country for piloted jobs. I managed to do a week with Medway pilots, and that gave me a taste for what it was all about, what the ship handling was all about, what the job was all about. And I got a very quick induction into what the Merchant Navy world was all about and how different that was to the Royal Navy. And I loved it. So I interviewed all around the country. And, you know, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of support out there for getting your CV right, for getting your interview skills right. And my advice is interview for anything and everything. Push on every door possible, see which one's open. For me, LinkedIn was really helpful, and I got some advice on some keywords to put into my CV. And nowadays, a lot of recruitment agencies do a sift for keywords. So it's important to get some of those in there for your industry, and so that you're not just sifted out straight away. And for me, it was the word command, and that really helped. I also interviewed for a civil service position, which was about 5 grades or military 5 ranks above what my current position was at the time in the Navy. That included a presentation, meeting a team, and there was a psychologist there as well. It was very high level, and I didn't pass. But what I would say is that I nailed every interview after that. Because just the skills I gained from that, and, you know, how nervous I was and all the rest of it. I learned so much, so just give it a go. You don't know what you learn. And then, so I'm now a marine pilot for the Port of London Authority, so navigating ships on the River Thames. I've been doing that for 4 and a bit years now, and I've worked my way up to 175-metre long vessels with a draft down to 9.5 meters. and I'm progressing up to the next level as we speak. And I absolutely love it. The navigation part for me, I think one of my enduring memories from my time in the Royal Navy was actually when they took all the new equipment off them. So it was an exercise scenario, and I had to take a ship into a Scottish loch on the west coast of Scotland up towards a submarine base. And they've got sector lights on the way in. So a sector light is a leading light. You steer your ship onto it, and if it starts to change colour, you know you're off track. So I was going in using these sector lights, and I had my plan all laid out, and the exercise instructors took GPS off me. So it took GPS off me. So I was then going in on these sector lights, and I was using the echo sounder to work out where I was as it shallowed. I was using a stopwatch and my log speed, because I didn't have GPS speed. I was using my log speed through the water and a stopwatch, steady speed, and then making my turns. And because of the number of sector lights there were on this little, this narrow winding bend of the river into the loch, I was able to use the change of the sector lights to count me down to my wheelovers, and it was so much fun. And that was at the peak of my mental maths ability. Obviously, I had a whole team around me supporting me, but it's little memories like that when you've got your skills are so sharp, and they can take everything off you, and you're using proper old school techniques, not quite the sextant, getting the sextant out, but you know, near enough, stopwatch, log, and sector lights. I absolutely love it. And yeah, I wouldn't look back. Can't do that nowadays coming into the Thames, because they keep knocking down all the chimneys and the power stations, but there are other useful methods of coming in. I think I'll leave it there.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ivana. So the first question that came to my mind as we were talking through that might be of interest in terms of people trying to progress their career actively. You flagged the importance of keywords in your CV. So how did you figure out that humanity was going to be a keyword for your CV?
Because I networked prolifically on LinkedIn, I actually ended up connecting with people who were already in the industry, and they contacted me and made suggestions and recommendations. So, you know, don't worry about connecting with people you don't know, just connect with people in the industry or the industry you want to go into, and start saying hello, start building those relationships, those connections, and as I say, just push on those doors, and you'll find that, you know, one of them will open. The other thing I wanted to say as well is, you know, one of the reasons I went down the military route was I knew I was going to struggle funding myself through university. And so what the Navy option gave me was the opportunity to get all those qualifications whilst on the job. So I now have a degree in marine sciences, and I've got a international hydrographic qualification, category B, but I was able to do all that while on the job. So, you know, for those of you who, you know, don't feel that university is an option, there are other ways of getting those qualifications or getting those tickets.
Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions for Ivana?
So you kind of touched on it a little bit with your question LinkedIn, but how do you, or how would you utilize LinkedIn as a young person? You mentioned connecting with people, but what about when you want to connect with someone but their profile's locked and you can't connect or message them? Or how do you find the right people to connect with? How did you utilize it?
So you'll find that if you connect with enough people, you're only 1 or 2 connections away from the person you really want to connect with. So that's a way in. You look at other people's connections, which is an option. There is usually, unless someone's really locked down their account, there is an option to send an introductory message with your connection request. So that's a really good way of just introducing yourself, explaining that, you know, you're not a salesperson, that you're interested in the industry, you're not spamming their account, and that's another way. The other thing I would suggest is have a look at what networking events are going on. So if you're already associated with the Royal Institute of Navigation, come to an AGM, meet people, do the face-to-face thing. I went to a conference on people in the sea at Greenwich University when I was transitioning out of the military, and it's just an opportunity to just talk to lots of different people, get yourselves into the lectures, into the discussions, and be that annoying person at the front with a really good question. Get yourself known, and then that will strike up conversations with people after that discussion or after that presentation. And that's another good top tip.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any more questions for Ivana? Yep, Hannah.
I just want to say it's so nice to hear about you talk about loving it. Still, like, it's so kind of rare to hear people actually really say, I love this. That was really nice to hear, thank you. But I just wanted to ask, well, like, sorry to breach topic, but like, as a woman that's had this incredible career, having a career, is that something you've noticed has challenged you at all, or is it just something that you just like bypassed, you know, with your skills and knowledge anyway?
Both, yes. I would counter what Ramsey said, and I would say, especially to women working in a predominantly male environment, is don't be afraid to be difficult or to challenge if that culture isn't right, or if you see things that aren't right, because, and this is a good point I wanted to bring up, thank you, Hannah, if you don't have a champion, be your own champion. Okay, and if you're in an opportunity to influence others, be a champion for other people. You don't necessarily have to develop those champions around you. You can champion yourself, you can support yourself, and you can champion those people who are maybe coming up behind you, who need that support where maybe you didn't have it when you were going through. So, and this is what hopefully I'm doing today, championing all of you out there to consider these careers. And you know what, the challenges make you more resilient, and that gives you the drive to just power through and ignore where things aren't quite right.
Okay, thank you. Good question, thank you. Okay, so if there are any other questions for Ivana, we'll take them at the end as well. So we'll move on to our third speaker, Ed Parsons. Ed is Google's Geospatial Technologist, sort of self-runs as Google's geographer as well. Ed is a member of the board of directors of the Open Geospatial Consortium and a visiting professor at University College London. He's also a fellow of the Royal Institute of Navigation. So, Ed.
Thank you so much, and it's lovely to be here with everyone. Yeah, it's interesting, sort of having an event like this. It forces you to look back at your career and try to understand how you got to where you are today, and how much of that was planned and how much of it was accidental. And I think, if I'm honest, and we're probably all, if we're honest, Ramsey, Ivana, and myself, a lot of it is down to circumstance, accident, being in the right place at the right time. But there are some, I think, common principles that work their way all the way through my career that I've followed, and it seems to have worked. So I started out a bit like Ramsey, started off as an academic initially. I'm a geographer by training. I'm of the age that I sort of was self-taught software development and computer programming, because the teachers at school and even some of the lecturers at university didn't really understand these computer things. So if you were keen, you could get on and learn quite a lot, and then be recognized actually with your classmates as, oh, go and talk to Ed, he understands how that particular Fortran library works, and you start to kind of develop an expertise driven by, I think, finding things that you really have a passion for, finding things that you really enjoy doing, and that will always help you in choosing directions in your career moving forward. If you really enjoy something and you're willing to put the hours in above and beyond what's perhaps expected for you, then that's a surefire way of getting ahead. And you develop, I think, transferable skills in most of the activities, the things that we do. So I started off as an academic. We started the first undergraduate course in geographic information systems in Europe at Kingston University, where I had my first lecturing job. And we had a very pragmatic approach. We weren't particularly keen on research, but we wanted to make sure our students had the skills that they needed to then go and get jobs in the workplace. So what we would do every summer is employ as many of our students as we could during the summer working. We would do consultancy projects for businesses and developed sort of I suppose, an entrepreneurial spirit. I think that was quite useful as a sort of a balance to the perhaps more traditional academic view. It was good to have that balance. It wasn't necessarily approved of by the rest of the university at the time, but we thought it was the right thing to do. The transferable skill I got from that, and it's something that has led, I think, throughout my career, is the ability to tell stories. Although I'm a technologist, and technology is key to what I do, actually, it's a long time since I've written any code or done any software development. I spend most of my time in all of the jobs I've done, throughout my career, really explaining what the impact of technology can be to individuals, to corporations, to organizations, to society as a whole, to try and draw a narrative, to try and paint a picture of what sometimes quite abstract technology or processes are, and turn those into stories that people will understand and that will hopefully establish trust, or at least acceptance of a new technology that's coming through. And I kind of learned to do that lecturing on the nightmare slot that every lecturer always gets at university, which is at 5 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, teaching statistics. It's the worst possible slot you can imagine. So you have to come up with ways of keeping that entertaining. So that kind of got me going. I moved on from academia when, and I think this is the point Ramsey made, sometimes you recognize that actually you've got perhaps as far as you want to go in a particular role, or there are different directions that are more interesting to you. So I moved from academia and went to work for an American software company that was based in California, and got to spend some time in Northern California working for basically a design software company. That was very different from academia. It was a very different environment, actually quite a lot of sales focused, but some of those, I say, transferable skills about telling stories were equally relevant in that sales environment. But there were different drivers there, different, I suppose, measures of success. And that's, I think, something that, again, is always important in your career, is to recognize, well, how is success measured in this particular role, in this particular job? What makes you successful? Sometimes it might be, a sales figure if you're in a sales environment. Sometimes it might be about developing influence and making sure that projects run smoothly, or it might be actually making your boss look good, which is always a good skill to have. Always try to identify, what are the things that will make you successful in a particular role. And I think that's easier to do if you can sort of sometimes step back from your job and look at you as an individual, look at you as the product that you are trying to sell, that you are trying to market, and almost think about, how do I market myself to the organization that I work for? But probably equally importantly, as you get higher up the food chain, perhaps, how do you market yourself to the outside community, to your discipline, to your area of expertise? And after working for this American software company, I then went to work for Ordnance Survey here in the UK, the National Mapping Agency. So I went from an American software company to senior civil service. So again, that's a big change, a big shift in direction. And at OS, I worked hard to try and develop clearly the direction the Ordnance Survey was heading in, and we were working very hard to move the organization from being a mapping agency, quite traditional about producing pink and green covered maps that you can run around the hillsides with some Kendall mint cake to keep going, to change that to be basically a database company. So, we produce a digital model of the world, of the UK, from which we derive maps. So that was the day job, if you like. But alongside that, in parallel, I worked quite hard to establish my position in the industry by blogging. Blogging was a big thing once upon a time, before social media, but being recognized within the industry for what we were doing and trying to, again, explain what we were doing within the context of the industry. So I kind of developed a profile a little bit outside of my role in being recognized as an industry expert, as well as I'm working for Ordnance Survey. So you kind of have two hats, and sometimes I think it's helpful to have that almost dualism, that you can then create some kind of credibility. You're not just seen as a corporate messenger. You actually believe in things that you say. Sometimes, though, obviously, that gets a little bit complicated when perhaps what you believe in and what you say doesn't necessarily align with what the organization believes in and what the organization says. And for me, that culminated in one of the great failures of my life, pretty much getting sacked from the Ordnance Survey. Largely, it was a debate that was quite big in the, I suppose, 2005, 2006, around open data and how much government data was made available for free, and how much was it the role of government to charge people. So it was a very active debate. Once upon a time, you might not believe this, but the Guardian newspaper had a technology supplement every Thursday, where it was just technology stories, technology jobs. Everybody read the Guardian on Thursday, and this got roped up into the Guardian, and it got all a bit difficult. So I left, a little bit under a cloud. But as a result of that, I suppose Google phoned me up the next day and said, "Hey, do you want to come and work for us?" And getting hired to Google is never straightforward. It takes many, many interviews. It's a long, complex process, very much managed by your peers. So you're actually hired by engineers who you may well work with, who will do a job similar to you. Some ways you could argue that develops a bit of a monoculture, but that's the way that Google used to hire people. And I was hired by a long way the cleverest person I have ever met in my life, a guy called Michael Jones, who was one of the founders of Google Earth, and an absolute legend in the industry. And he was so influential to me, and he's taught me a lot of very important lessons. Again, very much alongside what my colleagues have said, in that someone will recognize your skills, your capabilities, and help you develop in your role. You have to do the same thing. You have to likewise recognize skills and developments in others, and what comes around goes around. And I've always had a view that I will talk to anyone. I don't care whether you are senior vice president of a huge American software company, or you are a second-year geography graduate. I will talk to you, and I'll have a chat and hear what you think, and listen to you, and be part of the community. Because our community, whether we're working in geospatial technology, in navigation, it's still incredibly niche, and we are all part of relatively small networks where we kind of begin to know everybody that you need to know. And you need to keep plugging away at that, bring people in to the community, but work hard on that networking, work hard on establishing the people that you need to talk to, people that you might need to influence, and develop the community as you work your way through it. And it's a recognition, I think, of, hey, we are always going to be very focused on our activities, on our own interests. So it's kind of hard. You don't really want to make enemies if you avoid it within this industry. And ideally, I don't know what it is about navigation, what it is about geospatial technology. There are a lot of really nice people, and a lot of people that will give you time And if you are willing to go and talk to them, don't be put off by someone's job title, go and have a chat, and people will give you a lot of their time, will give you a lot of their expertise. They will help you get on because they have already gone through that process. So I think that's a key thing moving forward. And for me, I guess, although our industry is very technically led, and we need to understand, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, fundamentally, all technology is actually about sociology. It's about taking what we build and making it something that's relevant to humans, that will improve people's day-to-day lives. And I think if I look back at my career, that's what I've spent most of my time doing. Saying, okay, from all of this toy box of technology, science, data, how can we turn that into something that makes people's lives better? And the thing I'm probably most proud of in my career is the work that we've done to make sure that now in Europe and indeed around the world, when you dial emergency services on your phone, your precise location is shared with emergency services wherever you might be. And that, literally has saved thousands of lives by making sure that people can be found when they need to be found. There's a technology piece to that, clearly, a lot to do with the work that Ramsey is responsible for and his company have built. But actually, there's a much bigger societal change that you have to deal with, explaining to people that it's okay under particular circumstances to share your location, and we've built privacy protection around that, so it's only shared with the emergency services. It's not shared with Google or Apple or whoever. And it's going through those steps, understanding, well, what's important to someone in those circumstances making a call. Do they want to go through 5 dialogue boxes agreeing to terms and service for, hey, I've broken my leg, but actually I don't mind sharing my information to you. No, you don't want to do that. You need to understand what the process is. So a lot of, I think, what we do is actually translating technology to something that's appropriate to people. And that's what I love doing. And I still get up every day and are excited to go to work because we're changing the world. Why wouldn't you want to be able to do that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. A lot of what you spoke about was linked to sort of transferable skills, if you like, and the skills of storytelling and writing blogs and all these sort of extra things. Was that a natural thing to you, or did you do anything to sort of specifically give yourself that sort of skills?
No, and it was probably sort of a bit counterintuitive to me, because actually naturally I'm quite a shy person. I don't like, I struggle in, cocktail parties. I'm the boring guy in the corner that doesn't talk to anybody. I struggle a bit during that, but I also recognise that I'm perhaps a little bit opinionated. So sometimes I want to get across what I think is important. And so actually for me, blogs and I suppose now social media, it created an outlet for me to be able to communicate to people where I might struggle in an environment like this, saying, I think we should do X, Y, and Z. Actually, by writing a blog post, I found that easier, and I kind of then started to build a community around people who then commented on my blog post, and then we could start to talk, and you kind of built up connections in that way. So I think it's something you actually have to actively work on. You actually, as I said, have to kind of externalize a little bit and say, okay, what is edparsons.com? And I got there very early to get my domain name hired. What does that look like from the outside world? How do I market myself? What do I want to appear to the outside world to be? And what's my thing? Am I Coke or am I 7-Up? How am I marketing myself? And I think that's a really important perspective to have.
Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions? Yeah, I can always press.
So one of the things that you talk a lot about is community. And that's one of the things that I find in RIN is that we've got a huge community. But what I think is nice about RIN is that there are people like me who know nothing about navigation can still be included in the conversation. And I have an interest in it. I love coming to these events. I love talking to people. But what about people who would like a career in navigation, but they're not someone who's been in the forces, they're not an academic? How can you get into this niche area without being a brain box?
Yeah, I don't think there were that many brain boxes, to be honest. Well, Ramsey maybe was a brain box, but yeah, I think one of the great things about RIN and about this community is its diversity. It's a very broad church. It comes from people that can do signal processing of radio RF frequency from satellites, all the way down to people that understand how primates navigate in the jungle, and understanding that sort of breadth of areas where fundamentally navigation is a key part of society. We all spend probably quite a lot of our time navigating, and some of it is down to, yes, technology, but a lot of it is down to understanding the mental processes that we use for cognition, designing buildings perhaps to be easier to be navigable. A lot of it is about reflecting on us as individuals and saying, well, what's my experience? What's the experience of my friends and family? What's the experience of my parents in finding their way around the world? And I think sometimes it's easy to be perhaps misled, put off by the name of the society, the Royal Institute of Navigation. It sounds like, some guys in a black and white film in the back of Lancaster working their way across the world to Germany. But navigation is much, much broader than that. And to be honest, it's one of the main use cases of us having mobile phones now. In terms of how do people use mobile phones, they use them primarily as a camera. And then after that, they probably use them as a navigation device. They don't use them as phones. But every time you think about, hey, I've had a frustration using Google Maps or Apple Maps, that's a perfect opportunity for you to fix it. To say, actually, no, we could do it better. Or, if I jump out of a tube station and I can't work out which way I need to turn, left or right, when I come out of South Kensington tube station, that's a navigation problem that needs solving. So I would say, focus on users and on user problems. And many of those user problems won't require new technology, won't require the creation of some new scientific breakthrough. It will require a better understanding of humans and how humans operate. So if you can do that, you're well set up.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Michelle, you look you have.
I have. So I've got two, which I would
Job
like
in journalism.
So I have two questions that I'd like to ask, and this is open to any of you. So the first one is, when I was starting out my career, I was always told, get a job for 1 year in the company and then you can move. And this 1 year seems to be like a golden time. And there's two sides to this question. One, is that true? And two, if it is, what happens in what matters more, the time you've been with the company or the position? Let's say you've been with them for 2 years, the company, but you've only been in one particular position for maybe 3 months. In that case, what matters more, the fact you've been with the firm for a long time or the time you've been in that particular position?
If I may, so I would actually say, we've been talking a lot about transferable skills, and I would say actually it's more about what you've learned as an individual, and then how you sell your experience to your next, in your next interview or on your CV. So it's the classic, is it a car model? So your circumstance, what you did and what the result, what you achieved and what the result was. And if you've managed to, in that 1 year, no matter what your position or, how long you stayed there, if you've managed to gain those skills and you can share them in a way that is transferable and your next company will want, then you've got nothing to worry about. It's more about what you've learned yourself, I think, rather than your titles.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's what have you gained from that time, that experience? Clearly, there is an element that people will look and say, "Ooh, they were only there 6 months. What happened?" Well, you need to be able to answer what happened. Why was I there for that period of time? But if you can answer that, that's not a problem. It should be based on, what did I gain from that time? And if it just didn't work for you, then be honest and say, hey, it wasn't the right job for me, or circumstances happened. That's okay.
And also selling your potential. And I think a recruitment agencies are now leaning more towards, the really good ones, and leaning more towards not what you have achieved, but what you can achieve. So if you're only there 6 months, but you learn, a year's worth of knowledge or skills, and you can show that you've got that adaptability, then that's wonderful. Whereas if you were there for 6 months and you only learned 2 months of knowledge, that's the difference there.
Thank you. And my last question, I promise.
No, we don't.
So I like to talk, as you can guess, but I also like to shock people. And interviews, I'm one of the sad people that love interviews. I know that my CV, if I get to an interview stage, I'm in with a good shot. And that's just because of the way that I like to shock people. And asking questions is something I love to do. My favourite interview question is to ask somebody, what's the first 100 days are going to be like? Because they're the most important days in a US presidency. That's when things can get done the most. In your lifetime and experience, whether it's you asking them or you receiving them, what's the most shocking interview question that's made you think?
That's not the direction I thought the question was going. I'll answer the question I thought you were going to ask, and then I'll try and answer that one. So that's very interesting you said about 100 days, because actually one of the most important questions we ask at FocalPoint for very senior hires is to present to us what they're going to do in their first 100 days. So for VPs and above, we ask them to give a presentation on what they will bring for the first 3 months. And it actually relates back to something you said a moment ago about staying in a job a year, etc. Well, actually, within the first few months, and the people you are working with know how well this is all going. And there's no point like dragging it out any longer than it needs to be if things aren't working. So it's interesting that you bring up the 100 days yourself. I think that's a very good thing to do. It's very practical to say to you, look, here's what I will do in this company. Does that fit? Because this is what I want to do. And if it doesn't fit the interview, then everyone knows that there's no point going any further, especially you, and then you won't waste any of those 100 days. But your question didn't go in that direction. You asked, what's the strangest question you've been asked in an interview? I might have to defer to everyone else while I have a think about that. Is there a bonkers question you've been asked in an interview?
That suggests you've got so many strange questions. You've got to work out. Let me put it slightly differently. A question I used to like asking when I was a university lecturer, and we used to interview people to come to join the course. It's a question for which there's no right answer, and I always think they're the best questions. So the question was this: on your journey to the university today on the train or in the car, if you had the choice of spending the time, would you look out the window and just watch the world go by, or would you read a textbook? What's the right answer? For me, I was looking for, well, actually, I quite like looking out the window. I want to be a geographer. I want to explain why the world looks like the way it does. I'm interested in those observational skills. Or likewise, I want to spend time reading up about whatever. There was no right answer, but I wanted to see what people's thought processes were for a question that they knew, perhaps, in their hearts of hearts, there was no right answer, but they were thinking, oh, now what should I say here? What are they actually looking for? And I think those are really interesting and sometimes quite difficult questions to answer, but valuable because of that. You must have had so many interviews in your career.
Well, no, actually, because my first interview was when I was 16, and I was in the Armed Forces Careers Office. And then it was 12, 13 years later that I started doing interviews. I've probably got two I can mention. One was, have you got something to do in your spare time because you won't work a lot? It's the most bizarre. That was the interview I did actually straight after that senior civil service one, and I sort of led the interviewers because they weren't asking the right question. It was very bizarre. I didn't get that job, but I opted for London instead. And then at London, I was asked, you know, because as a pilot, we're generally working on our own. And I was asked that question, well, you know, what is it like? You know, are you good at working on your own and just having that sole responsibility? I'm a single child. I don't have any siblings. I'm quite introverted, or, you know, I put myself out there, like Ed was saying, to meet people and ask difficult questions. But I sort of turned the question around. I was like, well, no, actually, I'm part of a bigger team, and we're a part of a bigger support network, and I'm not bringing the ship in on my own. You know, you've got the people you're on board with. That you know, you integrate yourself into a team very quickly to get the ship from A to B safely. You're talking to people on the radio. You're talking to the linesmen and the tugboats and everything when you come along. You're not on your own at all, really. And so, you know, I think that there's one great thing is how you can flip a conversation, even if it shocks you, to go, well, actually, that's not the right question.
Have you got one, Ramsey, in the end?
Well, the only thing that sprung to mind actually was when I interviewed for BA Systems, more the experience that I had with the style of the interviewing, and they used recruitment centres. I don't know if such things are still a thing. And I came out of that thinking, God, that's a terrible way of hiring people. But so let me explain that sequence of events. So the recruitment centre had like whatever 200 people turning up and going through this sausage factory process of putting the people through all these kind of different tests and stuff. And one of them was that it was in a hotel, so they were taking people off into lots of different rooms. And one of the tasks was that you were going to turn up and go into a room, and the instructions would be in the room, and you'd have 10 minutes, and someone's going to come, right? And so sod's law, I get taken to my room, and computer says no, the key card doesn't work on the door. So the person that was taken around was like, oh, hang on, I disappears off, comes back a few minutes later, opens the door, and I sit down, start reading the instructions, and I get about halfway down the instructions about how I'm picking up some role for somebody who's leaving the company, and this is the information, and someone's going to come in and they're going to ask me questions about the role I'll be doing, something like this. And the task was clearly to absorb the information in 2 bits of paper quite quickly and then discuss them. And the person came, right? And so I'd have like 2 minutes instead of 10. And I was like, the door didn't open, I had to go get the key card. I only had a couple of minutes, and this person was in full like, no, I'm in character, and sort of ignored all of that. And once it was like, no, I'm getting on my flight, I've got to go now, tell me what's going on with the project, whatever. And I was just like, I am not working for this company. But I took myself through, literally was just like reading it and thinking, I do not want to work for a company that uses methods like this to hire people, right? And at that moment, after the assessment center, I was like, no, I'm going to work for this company. And then my last interview of the day was actually a one-on-one interview with the person who would end up being my boss. And they said, hey, look, I've read, the information you gave in your PhD. We'd actually really like to take your PhD and put it into our autonomous vehicle project. We think we could add mobile phone positioning into our autonomous vehicle. Would you be interested? And of course, the whole thing went 180 degrees. where do I sign? And you know, the important thing was this person was a really nice person who's going to be my boss. They wanted me to build on my PhD, and the whole thing turned around. But I could have literally just got in the cab and left after engaging in part of the interview, which I just thought, this is so stupid and unfair that I don't want to engage in this. So I don't know what the two morals of that story might potentially be, but one might be at least stick it to the end to find out if the end of the process is better than the middle. Yeah, it wasn't a silly question in an interview, it was a silly interview style, which I think is stupid, but some of them might be stupid and stick them out just in case it's still worth it.
That's reminded me, so part of the Admiralty interview board, there's practical leadership tasks, and it's the list that, you know, you've got, you know, you're chosen to be the leader, and you have to get from A to B, and you're basically in a like a gymnasium, and there's barrels and planks and ropes, and you know, there's the danger zone, you're not allowed to step in, and you're given a series of instructions. And you have to develop a plan to get from A to B. And when I went through the second time, I don't remember the first time, but when I went through the second time, I couldn't work out how to get from A to B, but I knew how to get from A to A and a half. I knew how to get the team at least halfway there, and I banked on running out of time and my team being able to help me and support me get the rest of the way. And it's about that sticking it out and just going for it, and it worked. It worked because I didn't have all the answers, and that was a really great lesson, and I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to get us part way there and then rely on the skills and attributes of my team, and you know, that was just a wonderful lesson in sticking it out and going as far as you can get.
And that honesty point is also really important. So just, if you don't know, say you don't know. And then the worst thing you can do is make things up on the fly. So, you know, people don't expect you to be the complete package to hire you for a particular role. They know there's some development that's going to be needed, and actually they probably want to mold you a little bit to fit in with the organizational culture or whatever. So absolutely okay to say, well, no, sorry, I don't know, I don't have experience in that, but I want to learn.
Thank you. Are there any final questions?
I have one, if that's okay. It's kind of everyone. You were mentioning it's really important to have a champion or a boss that can help kind of foster your development, but the interview process can be quite short and you only get a small snippet into a company. Is there any tips on how you can analyze the company you're going for the interview for to understand if they are going to have good bosses, good champions, and they're going to have a good culture for you?
It's definitely tricky if you've got no current connections or links into the environment. If you already know people that work for that organisation, then that is obviously a key way of starting to gather that data. They might know somebody they can introduce you to and try and get a bit of information. Definitely try and find out as much as you can, and definitely check that one of the people interviewing you is going to be your direct line manager, your direct technical lead, your direct boss, and do treat it that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Definitely. The particular bit I was referring to with champions was this sort of longer term establishment of a friendship with senior people or influential people. So don't be shy to introduce yourself and be able to strike up conversations with your boss's boss. And you know, as senior as you can get in an organization, doesn't necessarily mean on day one go knock on the CEO's door. Although that is a good test of the sort of organization you're in, how they do react if you go knock on the CEO's door on day one. That will probably tell you a lot you need to know about that person. What I was referring to is sort of building these long-term relationships and friendships with people, so that they get to know who you are and what you're doing, and become a person you can contact. And it's not just champions within your own organisation, but within organisations that you might have to work for as well. So FocalPoint licenses IP to other companies, and the companies where we have a champion in there who likes me and likes other senior people in FocalPoint, understands what we do and how it's important to them, that is a real path of least resistance to the technology getting deployed. And companies where we haven't yet found our champion, you know, is much slower progress. And just try to get as many of them as you can. And it's all about building the network. And on the same sort of point that was mentioned earlier about how to contact people and how to reach out and LinkedIn and emails and stuff like that, it can be useful to try and find the least noisy channel. So when I'm struggling to raise somebody on email, I'll try LinkedIn next. And then the last resort that can often work very well is sending someone an SMS, not WhatsApp, not any other social media, but an actual SMS text, because they're so rare to get now. And it sort of works in both directions. I can have an email sitting for weeks in my inbox that I know about but haven't got around to yet. And if the person SMSs me, I'm like, oh yeah, sure, and sort it out really quick. So try and find your least noisy channel. And when you're trying to reach out to somebody to contact them for the first time, if someone else can make that introduction, if you have that connection, you actually ask them to make the connection for you, that can really help. But the other thing that can really help is put in your subject line and really on in the message that you both are affiliated somehow. So like, we're both members of RIN and I'd like some help on this. We'll get you much further than I'd like some help on this. And you know, that works both ways. I get a lot of cold call emails. You should be careful about this because it's being recorded. But an example of a successful cold call email was someone that actually opened with the fact about how we both gone to Cambridge together and knew this person, and would they like me to buy their stuff? At least I read the email and actually responded to them. So any information you can get on early on, which effectively sort of personalizes you with the person you're trying to speak with, it's just good psychology. It just helps. Don't make it up though. No one likes to lie. Everyone listening, don't make it up. Don't letting me say you also went to Cambridge.
I was here at Cambridge.
No, I totally agree about going into the interview with your own set of questions for the organisation you're joining. That definitely that's the way to go, because you'll get a feel when they respond to you of the sort of culture and the sort of environment that you're going to go into.
Yeah, do your research. You want to be entering that room knowing as much as you possibly can about that company, and if it's not right for you, maybe you should even be got to that point. So you need to have done that research. And I think we just have to be honest that sometimes those initial interviews are probably just a screening process, and it will be, you know, maybe someone from the HR department kind of going through a relatively formulaic set of questions, and you know, you could ask them something and they probably wouldn't know the answer. So it's trying to sort of get beyond that to actually understand what's going on. And if, you know, if in that interview you can, you know, drop a few names of people that you know that might be involved and might be working with them, that helps enormously. Yeah. So as much knowledge as you can coming in, and as the guys have said, treat the interview as you're interviewing the company as much as the company's interviewing you.
Recommendations are also really good. So you can get you can ask for recommendations on LinkedIn, so you can get recommendations for other people. Say you've done a, you know, for my example, the week I did with Medway pilots, I got one of the pilots to do a little recommendation for me on LinkedIn. He also wrote I also got a letter of recommendation that I included in my CV and interview pack. So, you know, there are lots of different ways in, and just figure out what works for the company that you're going to join, and work out how you get in. That's not just through the interview process, but those connections you can make in other ways as well.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I feel like these conversations could go on all day, which is fantastic, and it's kind of exactly what we want. But I think we will wrap it up there. Partly because it's so warm in this conference room that I really want to get a breath of fresh air. But thank you so much to everyone who has joined us. Big thank you again to Ramsey, Ivana and Ed. Really appreciate you taking the time to share all of that, and I hope we can spread this far and wide, and that many people can learn from everything that you've learned from. So for anyone else who's watching this, later on, do find our younger members group on our website. Our website is rin.org.uk. You can contact them at ymg@rin.org.uk. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll be in touch soon.